Imagine walking through a quiet, dark summer garden at midnight. Most of the flowers have closed their petals, the colors have faded into the shadows, and everything seems asleep. But if you take a special ultraviolet blacklight out of your pocket and shine it into the darkness, you will see something absolutely shocking. Hidden among the regular leaves, a cluster of flowers will suddenly light up, glowing in the dark like a bright, electric neon sign. You might think you have just discovered a rare, exotic, or genetically modified plant, but you haven't. You are looking at one of the most common, traditional, and familiar flowers in the world. For generations, people have treated this plant as a boring, old-fashioned decoration from their grandmother's garden. They think it is just a simple, pretty flower with a nice smell.
But behind its classic, innocent appearance, this plant is hiding a secret nightlife, an incredible transatlantic history, and a level of wild toughness that most gardeners completely underestimate. Today, we are exploring the Garden Phlox, or Phlox paniculata. And by the end of this video, you will realize that this boring garden classic is actually a brilliant biological machine, burning like a hidden flame in the night. If you mention phlox to modern landscapers, many of them will roll their eyes. A massive myth has grown around this plant in recent years, the myth that it is an outdated, weak, and fussy European ornamental. Because phlox has been grown in gardens for hundreds of years, people associate it with the past. They think it belongs in old, dusty Victorian paintings, not in modern landscapes. Furthermore, many gardeners believe that phlox is incredibly fragile. They plant it, and by midsummer they watch in horror as the beautiful green leaves turn completely white, covered in a powdery, dusty fungus.
Believing the plant is ruined and dying, they rip it out of the ground or spray it with heavy chemicals, cursing it as a weak, useless diva that cannot survive on its own. But this is where the myth begins to fall apart. First of all, this plant is not a weak European aristocrat. And secondly, that terrifying white fungus? It is barely even hurting the plant. To understand why we have misunderstood this flower for so long, we need to look past the garden and go deep into the wild woods. Botanists know Phlox paniculata as an herbaceous perennial, meaning it grows back every year from its roots. But it did not evolve in a perfectly manicured European garden. It is a rugged, wild native of North America, originally growing in tough environments like open woodlands, thickets, and the rocky banks of streams. In the wild, this plant is an absolute survivor, and its biology is perfectly tuned to its environment, especially when the sun goes down. Remember that neon glow under the ultraviolet light? This is no accident. The flowers contain specific pigments that absorb invisible UV light and reflect it back. While humans cannot see this without a special flashlight, many insects can see UV light perfectly. But the phlox doesn't just use light to attract attention, it uses chemical warfare. During the hot daytime, the phlox smells nice.
But at dusk, as the sun sets, the plant shifts its chemistry and dramatically turns up the volume of its perfume, releasing a heavy, sweet, intoxicating scent into the night air. Why? Because the phlox is specifically calling out to the night shift workers of the insect world, like the massive sphinx moth. The moth uses the UV glow as a landing pad and the strong perfume as a radio signal, hovering in the dark to drink the nectar. And what about the dreaded white fungus, powdery mildew? While it looks terrible to human eyes, making the leaves look like they were dusted in flour, it is usually just a surface issue. The wild phlox has such a powerful, extensive root system that it simply ignores the fungus, drops its ugly leaves in the fall, and comes back stronger the next spring. It is not dying, it is just surviving a difficult summer. Because of its striking colors, early botanists were mesmerized by it. In fact, the word phlox comes directly from the ancient Greek word for flame. When early explorers saw massive wild fields of red and bright pink phlox blowing in the wind, it looked like the ground was on fire. But the history of this plant involves a fascinating reverse invasion. Today, we often talk about European weeds invading North America. The phlox did the exact opposite. In the early 1700s, plant collectors gathered the seeds of this wild American flame and shipped them across the ocean to Europe. When it arrived in Europe, it caused a botanical sensation. The British and the French became absolutely obsessed with it. Victorian breeders spent decades hybridizing it, creating new colors, and turning the wild American river plant into an elite, expensive symbol of high-class gardening. And then, in a strange twist of history, European nurseries sold these new, expensive varieties back to Americans. The plant had crossed the ocean twice, changing from a wild survivor into a high-status luxury, making people completely forget where it actually came from. The interesting part is not just that it traveled the world, but the ecological power it holds wherever it grows. Ecologically, the garden phlox is a crucial lifeline. By late summer, usually in August and September, many early blooming flowers have already died. The landscape is running out of food. Just when insects are getting desperate, the phlox bursts into bloom, creating a massive fueling station. Its long tubular flowers are perfectly shaped for the long tongues of butterflies and hummingbirds. For migrating species like the monarch butterfly, which needs massive amounts of energy to fly thousands of miles south, a large patch of phlox can mean the difference between life and death. And for the home gardener, there is excellent news. Unlike many other ancient ornamentals we have discussed, phlox is completely non-toxic. It is safe to grow around curious dogs, cats, and children. In fact, the flowers are technically edible and are sometimes used by high-end chefs to decorate summer salads or frozen inside ice cubes for fancy drinks, adding a slight, spicy sweet flavor. So, knowing that this is a tough, wild river plant, how do you actually keep it healthy and avoid that ugly white fungus in your garden? The secret to growing phlox is understanding physics, specifically airflow. The biggest mistake gardeners make is planting their phlox tightly packed against fences, walls, or other large bushes, and then watering them from above with a sprinkler. Powdery mildew thrives in stagnant, humid air and wet leaves. To keep your phlox healthy, you must give it room to breathe. Plant it in full sun, where the morning light can quickly dry the dew off its leaves. Leave space between the plants so the wind can blow through the stems. And most importantly, always water the plant at the base, right on the soil, keeping the leaves completely dry. If you give this wild plant sunshine and a good breeze, it will bloom for weeks without a single spot of disease. Let's look at what we've learned. People said this plant was an outdated, boring grandma flower with no surprises. The truth? It is a highly evolved nocturnal machine that glows in UV light to attract giant night-flying moths. People thought it was a weak, fragile European ornamental. The truth? It is a tough North American native that crossed the ocean twice and can easily survive a bad case of summer fungus. People believed it was just for decoration. The truth? It is a critical, late summer fuel station that keeps butterflies and hummingbirds alive during migration. The myth makes it a boring relic of the past. The truth makes it an ecological powerhouse. So the next time you walk past a garden on a warm summer evening and you catch that familiar, heavy, sweet perfume drifting through the air, do not just dismiss the phlox as an old-fashioned plant. It may not be the newest, rarest flower in the garden center. It may not have magical medical properties, but it carries something almost as powerful. A strange and wonderful biology,
a history of conquering the gardens of Europe, and an unbreakable dedication to the insects that rely on it. It is not just a garden decoration. It is a flame burning in the dark. It is a wild traveler that crossed the world and came back home, still quietly holding the ecosystem of our late summer on its shoulders.